What do you do when your faith system no longer fits? Because sometimes you outgrow it. Sometimes you graduate, you ascend, you leave the old, itchy, worn-out way, and you begin to walk in the new. Sometimes you grow. Join the conversation with me, Tony Werfel, author, speaker, teaching pastor, as we help unwrap and rebuild a faith that no longer fits. We learn to walk into the new, messy journey called life. Hello everyone, welcome back. It is a beautiful sunny day in Southern California and I am just loving it. So beautiful. I'm so glad you joined me again. This is our 12th podcast. We're in double digits, very exciting. And today we're going to kind of move through the idea of good news. I want to talk about good news today. And for many of us, when we talk about good news, it looks like a pay raise or the birth of a baby, or if you're not a Lions fan like me, your team may be winning playoffs or maybe even go to the championship games. That's good news, right? But for Christians, they also have this thing called the gospel, the good news. And depending on which tribe you talk to, the news, it's a little bit different. They all have their different elements of what the good news is. And so I've spoken to groups of students who are studying to be pastors, and I've actually asked them, what is the good news? Like, define it for me. And I've gotten so many interesting responses. I've had everything from, well, God is love, and that's the good news. I think, okay. And then you'll get this other guy who will like stand up and he'll bring out like the bar graphs and the timetables and the decoder rings and be like, the good news is that like Jesus is coming again, and here's how I know it, and I think it's during this time period, and the Pope is evil, and he wears this crazy hat, and they'll get crazy. And that's good news to them. It's so fascinating what good news is to people. And so while there are many different distinctions within the different elements of Christianity, you will find a pretty common thread in most of them. And it goes like this, that man is sinful and bad, and so there has to be some kind of price. So Jesus pays his price, and now God can be with us forever. And so I'll define it even more. When you start thinking that way, it essentially is the good news is that God would create this way for you to essentially be separated from him. And he gives you this arbitrary test that he knew you were going to fail in the first place. And then God will hold it against you and remind you of your failures quarterly by having to murder your family lamb. And eventually you would need the blood of his son. Good news, right? I gotta be honest, if this is good news for Christians, you gotta wonder what's the bad news look like. I mean, because that sounds really terrible. That does not sound like good news. And so, as usual, I think we've missed the point again. I think we've twisted what the good news was, and we've taken a very medieval, I would argue, very archaic idea and really just started to twist it into something really gross. And so I think looking at the good news, what it meant for that early people, I think would be really helpful. So first of all, it's important to know the good news, the word gospel, it's derived from this word euangelion. And for this era, they were really familiar with the term euangelion, good news. It was the pronouncement of a new era. It was a political term. And it was used during times of like great empires like Rome and Greece. And so whenever a new king would begin his reign, he would send out messengers and they would proclaim euangelion, good news. A new reign is about to begin, right? It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. And so this emperor, this leader, that was such a terrible, okay, I apologize. But this new leader would essentially like say, everything's going to be so much better. My rule is going to be the best. It's a new era for everyone. And this is what they would share. And it got to the point where most people felt like very distrustful, like you and I do today. When someone comes in and they promise you the moon, you're pretty sure taxes are going to go up and things are going to get difficult, right? And so here are a couple things to notice about the good news, though. First off, the good news had nothing to do with how good or bad the people were. They hadn't actually earned anything. The reign, it actually had more to do with the leader than it did with the people, right? And so it's so fascinating to know this. It wasn't about you're sinful, you're bad, now there's this thing. No, it was about this new era and the promises made about the new era. So if you read the four books of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all revolve around the teachings of Jesus. And what you'll find is he spends almost all of his time speaking about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven, the new reign, evangelion, good news. And he'll essentially take a very negative political term and he's going to flip it totally upside down. And so in Luke is one of my favorite books out of the Gospels. And because Luke is very focused on the marginalized, the broken, the hurting, and flipping the value system upside down. And so in Luke chapter 17, verse 20 through 21, I find it really interesting. It says this: when asked by the Pharisees, who were essentially the lawmakers, the one that kind of kept tally of everything, are we're on the right track, right? When asked by the Pharisees, when the kingdom of God, this new reign, this evangelion, this good news would come, Jesus says this. He says, the kingdom of God is not going to come with observable signs. So first off, my friend with the graphs in the back, who is so sure they've predicted all of these crazy events. I'm sorry, friend, but like, you're missing the point. These beast seminars, all those things, you're just missing it. And it actually does way more harm than good. And I think you got to put those things down. Like, if you're going to hold on to those things, go to your bunker, hide out there, read them yourself. But please don't share that stuff anymore. It's just so painful. Jesus says it does not come with observable signs. That was almost therapeutic for me. Thank you for listening. So in verse 21, he says this: nor will people look and say, look, here it is, or there it is. For you see, the kingdom of God, again, this new reality, it's right here in your midst. It's right here. So the good news was that this reality, this kingdom, is right here. It's a new reality of living. It's the reign of God, and it looks different than all the reigns of these other empires. And that's actually really good news. It's a different kind of kingdom. But here's the thing. With this different kind of kingdom, it also brings some interesting tensions. So one might ask this: well, where is this kingdom? Where do I find it? And who gets to experience it? Is it only the rich? Who gets in on this kingdom? How do I get in on this thing? How do I experience this new reality? And maybe what needs to stay, what needs to go in order for me to align myself with these values? And how do we enter into it, right? Those are the kind of things that come up when you start asking questions about this kingdom, this new reality. And you'll see over and over again, those are the questions that people are asking Jesus. And so the gospel message of Jesus, it creates some interesting tension. So what you'll see with Jesus is that his teachings, they're about this new way of living, of navigating life. And it's actually going to flip it all upside down. So everything you thought you knew about economics, religion, politics, acceptance of others, it takes the conventions of the day and it just turns the table upside down. So please understand, all of the stories, the miracles, the teachings, the actions of Jesus, they all are shared for a reason. They're given to point toward what the kingdom of God, the new reality, looks like. So one of my favorite stories, it's about this woman who shows up uninvited at a party. And she shows up there at this banquet. And it's important to know that in the ancient Near East, the table, it had a lot of meaning in that culture. And at the table, this is where like social lines are drawn. And it's at the table where one offers hospitality, shows solidarity with those around them. And so this is oftentimes what the biblical writers are trying to show. They're showing that at the table, at this feast, at this meal, something powerful is going to happen. And so through Jesus, we observe this way of being in the world that actually welcomes sinners. He sits down with sinners. And sinners in that culture is not someone that like broke this rule or this rule. It's actually sinners in that culture were people who were the outcasts. They were the ones that were marginalized, undesirable, the lower crust of culture, right? And so this is what's going on. Jesus often will sit with sinners, the broken, the hurting, and he shares life with them. He shares the kingdom. And so in this specific story, Jesus enters Simon's house, and Simon is this wealthy man of power. And we see Simon, he does something really fascinating that I would argue only people during that culture are really going to pick up on. See, when you would normally enter a house of someone of importance, they would greet you first of all with this customary kiss. They'd wash their feet, the person's feet. And if you were someone of religious standing or a rabbi or whatever, or especially a king, which most of them were calling Jesus, right? The new king of this new reality, they would actually anoint the head of this person. And so Simon, when Jesus enters, Simon does none of this. He doesn't do any of it. And so Simon is disgracing his guest, and he's also disgracing himself. So what's really shocking, and I find the most compelling about this story, is that the one who shows up and actually shows hospitality and honor, it's not Simon. It's this uninvited guest in the form of this woman. And so she shows up, and what she does immediately, she goes to Jesus, she kneels at his feet, and this is like a complete shock to anyone because only males could sit at a rabbi's feet and learn. So she's already broken like a very obvious social boundary here. But she does it. She just does it unapologetically. Kneels before his feet. And then it says she kisses his feet. Something Simon didn't do. She kisses his feet, a sign of humility, and then washes his feet with this lavish perfume. And most scholars say this was so expensive that it would have been a year's wages. And so then she anoints his head with oil. So notice what the writers are doing here. I think it's so interesting. They're flipping everything upside down. For them, Simon would have been a perfect candidate for their idea of the kingdom of heaven. But the writers are almost saying, no, you got to stop here. See, I need you to look deeper. What you'll find is Simon is missing the kingdom. He's not actually participating in it. And so the question is, who is? Well, right there in front of them, the marginalized, the broken, the oppressed, it starts there. And they're the ones who seem to get it. And they are the ones that are worthy. So because of this new kind of reality that Jesus was teaching, love, serve humbly, share what we have, it was just causing things to be completely flipped upside down. So according to the writer, who's worthy of the kingdom? It's not the person, it's not the people, it's not the movements we would assume it is. It's actually the opposite. Again, the broken, the hurting, the marginalized, those are the people who will get it. And Simon, again, shows like this spiritual constipation. He misses it, just misses the point. So this new kingdom Jesus brings, it's like a table and it's set for everyone. It's the kind of place where power and privilege and oppression, those things just don't fit around the table. And so this feast motif, it's used often in Jewish literature because it plays on this long-standing tradition of what the kingdom looks like. So when you keep reading Luke, you'll see this. These banquets, they highlight this interesting idea of like how the self-absorbed banquet, it doesn't fit in the kingdom. When I focus on me over everyone else, it just doesn't fit. So Jesus tells us a really fascinating story about a wealthy man that invites guests from his community to a banquet. And these guests he's inviting, they're the upper class. They're the elite of town. And so, of course, for the Jewish people reading this, they are to assume immediately this is us. We're the ones that belong. We're the in. And so what happens would have shocked any of the early readers. All the guests are invited, and yet they all give excuses why they can't come. And so, again, huge slight in that culture. The landlord would have been so angry by this. But Jesus does something interesting here with the story. Usually, the banquet host that's been slighted would have felt shame and experienced shame from his community because no one chose to join him, But Jesus flips the understanding on its head because he essentially tells his audience that the shame doesn't actually fall on the host. It falls squarely on the invited guests because the invited guests, they choose not to come. He invites others then who he considers more worthy. And who's more worthy than the upper class citizens he invited? Because that's what they would have said. Well, who's more worthy than me, right? Who's more worthy than the Jewish people who feel so superior and blessed by their God over everyone else? Well, Jesus will tell you. He says, the poor, the isolated, the broken are more deserving of this banquet. And that's who's invited. So those are the people who will come. And this statement, it would have caused more than a couple of heads to be scratched. He chooses people who are not distracted by their everyday desires to climb social ladders and race on a wheel like a rat, right? The people who understand this new living, a new way of life navigated by a sense of love and gratitude, they're the people who have learned to appreciate the celebration the most. So, what about you? What are the current obligations that are causing you to miss out on the celebration, miss out on life? I wonder what's causing you to spend less time with your family and more time at work or just self-centered things. What is causing you to miss the celebration? Because Jesus calls people who stop to celebrate, he says, you are worthy of the kingdom. You get it. You recognize it when you see it. And again, this is why Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is in your midst. It's actually all around you, but some of us, we just miss it. And so I'm learning that the good news, it's actually all around me. It's these beautiful moments of power and wonder when someone does something that causes like this subtle shift, but that subtle shift, it just changes everything. It causes people to see a glimpse of repair, and it usually happens in the most unusual places, right? For instance, let me end on this. My daughter, Ashlyn, I just love her. Being a parent, I've learned so many amazing things I never would have picked up on before. And I'll never forget it. She was fairly young, I think maybe 5. And we just finished lunch. And we were living in Colorado, so we were walking downtown Boulder at Pearl Street, one of our favorite streets to go down. It has all these interesting shops. And Ashlyn, she has her allowance. And she's hoping to buy something down there. So we're walking with a mission, right? Like every store, she's looking and she's weighing whether is this toy worth it or not. What about that hat? I don't know. And she would just you could tell she's trying to figure it out. And so Pearl Street, it's fun. There's street performers, tiny shops, great food. And there are also tons of homeless people. And they've all got their cardboard signs. And so for many of us there, we've just kind of gotten used to people there that we almost desensitized to it. And so as we walk there, there's this guy who's holding the sign and he's sitting on a wheelchair. And he looks like he's pretty drugged up. He's got real glossy eyes and he's just kind of staring out at nothing. And my wife and I, we look at him and my daughter, and she kind of tugs on my shirt and asks, she says, Dad, is that man okay? And I said, he's homeless. He's probably very tired, sweetie. Let's just leave him be. I don't want her to get too close to him. And maybe we should just let him sleep. And I kind of nudge her to keep walking toward the next shop. And, awful. There in the window, I remember just kind of pointing to her, oh, there's a toy you might like. I think you got enough money for that. I think she had like $10. And so we kind of look at the different toys and finally we walk in. And of course, I get distracted. And I vaguely remember like a yo-yo or something. I don't know what I was doing. Anyways, I turn and my daughter's gone. I'm like, oh no. And I'm starting to look around, but I can't find her. And so I'm starting to panic a little bit, and because I've watched way too many of those child abduction movies. So I'm freaked out. And so I'm panicking a bit. And I see Danielle. I'm like, Danielle, where's Ashlyn? And so we start looking. And before we know it, we're outside. We're scanning the mall frantically. And I'm about to start yelling her name out. And finally, to my right, Danielle points out Ashlyn. And she's standing in front of this man. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And I start to walk over. And Danielle just says, wait. And I watch as the kingdom of heaven takes shape. My beautiful little daughter, she walks right up to this man, so brave. And she just pulls on the guy's shirt and he kind of opens his eyes. He almost looks like he's waking up and he kind of looks down at my daughter. And I watched his eyes kind of come back into focus. And she said something. I have no idea to this day what she said. And then she pulls out a $5 bill, half of the money that she saved, and she hands it to the guy. And in the guy's appearance, you can see that it kind of shifts. And he actually he kind of smiles. And he seems a little more present. And then I watch as my daughter, she does something I doubt any of us would have done. She gives him the bill, and then I watch as my daughter hugs his knees. She just hugs him. And like us, the man is shocked. And I'm just staring there looking at my daughter. And I walk over, and as I get closer, his eyes are a watery mess. He's crying, and he's patting Ashlyn's head. He's saying, "What a good girl, what a good girl." And he starts saying, "Thank you." And he's wiping tears from his eyes. And I'm a mess. My eyes are teary-eyed, and I'm so proud of my daughter at that moment. It's just so beautiful. And again, do I know what the man did with the money? Well, who knows? But what I saw, that was priceless. A little girl saw the divine in the broken. And this little girl saw an opportunity to share love. My daughter had an opportunity to witness love to someone else, to share love. And I was able to witness the kingdom of heaven in my midst. Because that's it. The kingdom of heaven was never about this distant place in the sky. It was about a new reality that's supposed to be experienced right now. And here's the beauty. You and I, we can participate in it right now. So what if today you attempted to see what others don't see? What if today you intentionally looked for that kingdom, love, compassion, mercy? What if those were the things you chose to look for everywhere you go? And what if you, like Ashlyn, when seeing the need, chose to participate in the feast rather than passing it by? And what if your life was lived more intentionally, looking for ways to live out this new reality, and you did it now? My hope for you today is that you will see a glimpse of this new reality all week long. And when you glimpse it, my prayer is that you might have the courage to begin participating in it right now. Participate in it right now, because the kingdom of heaven, it's right here in our midst. It's right here. And we can participate in it right now. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I can't wait to talk to you next week. Blessings, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.